Hello, everyone. So this is the really third episode in a week because we had a special bonus episode for Mother's Day. Really, I did. I don't know why I always say we. I just like feeling like I'm part of something bigger than I am when it's just me doing the podcast. But that was really a cool one. I've listened to it a couple of times just through editing mostly, and it's been nice to just know my friends and know my sister a little bit better and come to a new appreciation of them. And also, it's been great to hear some feedback, and I think some new listeners checked out the pod. So if you're coming back after that, really appreciate it. This is a bit of a different episode. So I have Tom Beheler, who is someone I was on his podcast, and it's a comedian in the States, and one of those people I just hope when things get back to normal-ish and I am back in the States and in his part of the country, that I get to meet him someday, because he was a lot of fun to talk to. We had a really good time. We recorded the podcast on Clubhouse, the app Clubhouse, and that's been a little bit of an experiment that I've been doing lately, but I'm just glad that we have the podcast in a normal form to share with you. You can definitely check out online. Tom's going to be doing a show with his comedy troupe that he has, or his club, District Comedy, and he's one of those people who took advantage of the time during the lockdown and set up his own thing with some friends, which is really cool. And one thing we talk about a lot is accessibility, and that's something that's really come up as a result of the lockdowns and the pandemic. People who couldn't get to clubs easily and couldn't go upstairs and things like that were able to perform online and not have access issues. I mean, there's the obvious issue of maybe internet access, but like physical access to spaces is something that really doesn't get talked about a lot outside of the community of people who are fighting for access. It reminded me, just in listening back to this conversation with Tom, about the documentary Crip Camp. It's on Netflix. It was really, really excellent. A bit of a hard watch here and there because you're seeing people really going through a lot, but also just showing this resilience that's so beautifully unique to us as people. And it's how the people got the Americans with Disabilities Act passed, and it was really inspirational. But we've come pretty far. I'm in London. I mean, I see that there are accessibility issues here for sure. I've lived in New York. It's very visible in Crip Camp. But I just think that people like Tom and others who are planning to keep going with their online shows, it's really just an awesome thing. He has a show called Fancy Mike, it's really Fancy Mike. It's not like a guy named Mike who's fancy. It's the Fancy Mike, like the fancy microphone, on June 25th. So if you're listening to this and you want to grab a ticket for that, that would be great. This is the show where they earn money, or you can even just donate to them. But that's district-comedy.com, and I just wanted to plug that for Tom because I really like what he's doing there. And I guess that's about it for this week before the podcast. So short intro, film recommendation, comedy recommendation. I guess the last thing is, this will be old news if someone listens to this a year from now, but I'm doing a solo show at Brighton Fringe and Camden Fringe. And if you want to see my comedy, if you're curious about what that's like, you can follow me at Rabia Comedy on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And I'm going to be doing some online previews for that coming up really soon. So check that out. But I guess that's all the plugs I need to do. This was a show where we're kind of plugging things, so I thought I'd start the trend now, so it wasn't just Tom who had to carry the load on that. I really hope you enjoy this episode and have some laughs and enjoy just listening to an artist. And he's also a librarian, so I find out some things about libraries that I never knew, but I thought were really interesting. Thanks for being here. Welcome to More Than Work, the podcast reminding you that your self-worth is defined by more than your job title. I'm Rabia, an IT project manager, comedian, nonprofit volunteer, and sometimes activist. Every week, I'll chat with a guest about pursuing passions outside of work or creating meaningful opportunities inside the workplace. As you listen, I hope you'll be inspired to do the same. Here we go. All right, welcome back this week, everyone. We have Tom Beheler here today. He is the founder and artistic director of District Comedy, and he's a librarian. I actually met him doing comedy because I haven't read in about 2 years. So anyway, Tom, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. I gotta say, I was in a similar boat until like very recently as far as the reading. It's been a minute. I need a good book.
Yeah, so I mean, I said what you do, but do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, so like Rabia said, I'm a librarian and I'm the founder of District Comedy, which is basically one of the many virtual comedy clubs that was started during the pandemic. But before that, I was also a professional actor for 9+ years, including on a short-form improv troupe, which lasted 8 years. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about all the things, the librarian stuff, the entertainment industry stuff, and surprisingly, I've noticed like a bit of intersections and overlap that they kind of have.
First of all, where are you right now?
I'm in Alexandria, Virginia.
Yeah.
In the United States. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So we got 75% of the listeners are in the US right now, so far anyway. So yeah, so let's just start with, I guess, maybe the librarian side of you, if that makes sense, and then go to the acting.
Absolutely.
And the comedy. Cool. So how did you end up a librarian, basically?
So I'm gonna already get you mad at me. So I got into librarianship through the acting, believe it or not. So kind of flipping it around. But basically I went to undergrad for theater, mainly because I was able to get a scholarship on it. So I was like, I don't know, it's like a free degree in something. I feel like so many jobs, it's just like, we need you to have the piece of paper. And then get over it. And then, so I did that, and then I did a lot of freelance work, acting, and then as a teaching artist for some time, and then the teaching artist stuff got me into substitute teaching, and then I did a long-term substitute assignment as a school librarian, or as they call them now, a media specialist. And then from there, I was hired as a library assistant. Then I was a library assistant for a public library in Loudoun County, then Arlington County, then a library associate. And weirdly enough, we'll probably get into this later, I've worked in a few libraries, but like weirdly enough, a lot of my experience is in maker spaces, which is like kind of a new thing for libraries in general. Not a lot of people are like too familiar with that concept, I feel.
I'm not, so let's go to that.
Okay, yeah. I mean, this is going to be like such an easy podcast for you because I have like so many things to talk about. I overshare. It's going to be great. But yeah, so maker spaces are basically... So libraries for the public in general have similar mission statements because we all go by the guidelines and the directives kind of approved by the American Library Association. So because of that, a lot of libraries include in their mission kind of lifelong learning, and this contributes to how we execute our programming. And we kind of tailor our programming depending on the library you are working in to the community that surrounds it. So basically, I've worked in a few libraries where the community has been like, we're really interested in technology. We're really interested in like crafting and making things. So because of that, the libraries have been able to secure funding as kind of a way to support their mission for this lifelong learning, to creating these spaces in the library that are, free to use by the public, minus the cost of materials, but all the equipment is free. And it's like, it's really cool spaces. It's like you go to a library and you think there's just going to be books, and then it's like, we also have a makerspace, and it's like a separate room with like sewing machines and 3D printers, and my last one had a laser cutter and like all kinds of cool stuff like that. So even though I am a librarian and I do work with books sometimes, and I actually work with data a lot, I have also worked a lot with like STL files and like OBJs, just like a lot of like weird coding stuff you wouldn't associate with books.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, that's good because like when I think about going to the library as a kid, I remember we used to go for like reading time or something when we were little. And that was neat because it was something that was free. So it's accessible to anyone. And you were also learning. And I know, like, I talked to someone recently who their library is being used as a meeting space for different things, but have you done anything with, like, improv or acting or anything? Like, done any workshops, or it's really more of a...
Yeah,
tactile
I've
thing?
tried. I have definitely tried, and some of my efforts have been more successful than others. One of the things that I do outside of the library stuff is I work for a theater company, and until I changed jobs recently, my library was very close to the theater company that I worked for, so we actually had a few opportunities there for, like, outreach and, like, being able to, like, have the touring company of the theater come in and do shows for the kids and kind of even get them to, like, gear shows and devise stuff specifically towards topics we were trying to address. I mean, it's just like with anything. Like, for February, we're going to do book displays on Black History Month, and then, like, if we can have a play to go alongside it to kind of, like, keep the initiative going, that's, like, so much better. But performance and the libraries is kind of a tricky situation. And I feel like especially so with comedy, because there's the side of the library, which is, like, its branding, where we are the library, we are knowledge, we are a place that is for everybody, which is inclusive to families coming in and using the library, like the story times you were describing. But on the other hand, it's also a very foundational principle of libraries to also not censor people. So I feel like that conflict of interest a little bit is why you don't see as many, like, performance-oriented programs, unless they're kids shows, or stand-up comedy programs at the library, unless they're geared specifically towards adults, and they kind of give a heads up, like, this thing isn't for kids beforehand. Could you imagine going into the library and being like, oh my god, there's an open mic going on, and somebody is, like, getting themselves canceled? Like, I just wanted some Dr. Seuss books, which has its own irony now, but...
Yeah, it's like, I guess you can do, like, burning books. What is the deal? And then kind of like...
What's the deal with burning books? Okay, separate subject, and this is probably for a different show. I do, like, have a dream of, like, having a tight, like, 30 minutes of library-specific material that I want to take to, like, an ALA conference at some point.
And everyone knows now that ALA is the American Library Association. So
that's, like, correct. They know. They're in the know.
To me, like, what I envision as a typical librarian, you are not. And that's a compliment. But, like, I just remember being scared of the librarian when I was a kid, because I was always, like, late with my books, because I would blame my mom probably and be like, oh, she didn't bring me. But
she is the one who drives.
At that point, yes, that's true. But, like, I remember I was bringing my nephews and niece to the library, and, like, our mother, my sister, also didn't return the books on time. And so then we go, and the kids are going to check out books, and it was a big deal, because it's like I was trying to do something, you know, like, come on, guys, let's go get books. And the four of us go up to the lady to check out our books, and she just goes, you owe 32 cents. And she's so mad. And it's like, all right. And I look at the kids, and I just, like, wanted to start laughing, but I don't want to get in trouble for teaching them to not respect people. And so I just go, okay. And, you know, I just kind of handled it. And then we found out I didn't have a library card. It was like this whole thing. It was like one thing on top of the other. And I just was thinking, man, what's up with this? You know, why is a librarian, like, this lady, it's possible this lady was mad at me when I was 5, and 35 years later she was mad at me again. It's possible, right? First of all, do you think that, like, probably that role's hard in the sense that you're dealing with the public, but, like, what do you like about doing the librarian work? And then is there any customers like me that just drive you nuts?
Well, I'll actually speak to that specific scenario first, because it's actually been, like, a big thing in libraries recently, at least in this area, is that there is this trend now going, which my current system just joined, which is we've actually eliminated overdue fines.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, so, which is really interesting that was, like, the reaction compared to the reaction that we're getting now, which is, like, we have a lot of people, don't get me wrong, that are, like, very supportive, and they're like, yeah, it's awesome that the libraries are getting rid of overdue fines. But believe it or not, we have people that are mad about it, And they're like, why are you getting rid of overdue fines? Like, how are we supposed to teach our kids responsibility if there's no overdue fines for books? And I'm like, okay, like, I wouldn't say this to a patron, but, like, part of me is, like, thinking, I don't know, parent. That would be one way. It's just parent your kids yourself and not rely on the library to teach them responsibility.
Like, this generation won't learn the responsible library policies of the previous generations. We're in trouble, right? Like,
yeah. Well, like, but it kind of goes back to what you were saying, where it's like, there is a big discrepancy now between, like, the people who are actually working as librarians and the idea that we have of librarians imagined in our heads based on truth. But, like, there's a lot of articles written, for example, about the main two stereotypes of librarians are, like, the dichotomy of, like, either the sexy librarian, a la the SNL sketch with, what's her name, who was the clown lady from Batman. I can't remember the character's name or her name right now, which is crazy because I love them both. Harlequin. And the actress who played her. Anyway, she did an SNL sketch where she was like
Margot
this sexy
Robbie?
librarian. Margot Robbie, yeah, thank you. But, so there's that, and then there's also, like, the old crone alternative where it's, like, the tight bun, the very, like, stern demeanor. Those are, like, the only two versions of librarians that I feel like people know right now. And the fines-free policy totally goes against, like, both of those. I guess not so much the sexy librarian. Maybe they're cool with not having fines. But basically, like, I find that a lot of the people in the library field now are, like, they're around my age. They're the ones who influenced me to dye my hair. They're, like, a bunch of tattoos, a bunch of, like, millennials, and a lot of, like, progressive thinking, which I think is definitely going to be good for us in the long run.
What do you like about working in the library? I can think of things I would like, similar, like, I've always wanted to work in a bookstore, which is, you know, something I could do, but I work in IT instead. But, like, what do you like about it? And because you've stayed in it while you're doing all these creative endeavors.
So one part of it is, and I feel like you've probably had people on your podcast before where they kind of have a day job in combination with the thing that they do creatively. And I think that is definitely, for the most part, it hasn't been lately, but, like, everybody's been extra stressed because of the pandemic. But, like, in general, I feel like the type of work involved with the library, for the most part, allows me to keep kind of a work-life balance, but also it is kind of tapping in two different sides of the same coin, which the coin is my personality. As far as the, like, left brain logical data oriented side gets a lot out of doing librarian stuff, especially my current position, has a lot to do with collections, which is, like, evaluating materials based on statistics of usage and, like, generating reports and that kind of thing, versus the other side of myself, which is artistic. And at the end of the day, really both of the acting, comedy, and librarian fields have in common that is a draw for me is that it's all about storytelling at the end of the day. And it's about what the story is, whose voices we're elevating, and kind of not just the content of the story, but how we're trying to kind of, like, relay that to the rest of society, I guess. I feel like when I talk, I always think of it and I judge it as if it's like an English paper, and I'm like, my English teacher would not like me using the word society right now. But, like, it's like how we kind of, like, relay our stories to the rest of the world, and that, I think, is not only something that's very fulfilling for me creatively and from a data-oriented side, but it's also something that's very important.
I agree. I mean, this whole podcast is just to help others through people's stories, basically. Just get people's stories out there, so hopefully people will relate to them and will be, you know, changing their own narrative of what they're doing in their future and stuff. Or saying, oh yeah, what I'm doing is great and I'm going to keep doing that. But either way, you know. So I think that is cool, though, because having a job that isn't taking all your energy away from you is good. You can be in a job where all your energy is gone and you don't have anything to put into your creativity, and it doesn't mean you don't want the creativity. It's just
Yeah. And I've definitely been, like, having to strike a new balance recently, because, again, it's like I was thrown into a great whirlwind in 2020 as far as, like, I got engaged, I graduated from library school, I then immediately got this new job, which is my first position as an official librarian, and just kind of, like, acclimating to adjusting to a new organization as well as adjusting to the pandemic. So I feel like even though I'm preaching, like, library's great for work-life balance, I haven't been actually feeling that recently. But, like, nobody has been. But I do feel like, in general, just the fact that there's an element of my job that corresponds to my beliefs in relation to the creative stuff I pursue, it kind of even gives me an advantage professionally to be able to think of things from that perspective, especially because with the improv and the acting and stuff, of course, I've, like, gone through a little bit of the writing process too with stand-up, and I've written 3 plays, I've done a sketch review, and I feel like that is also something that lends itself well to the library field, because one of my duties, and I made a post about this recently that people are, like, giving me a little bit of grief for, just because I sound very much like I'm complaining about something that isn't a problem. But one of the great things about my job is that in my free time, as, like, I guess a resume booster and, like, a professional development sort of element, I can get approved to review books that haven't been published yet. Oh. And I used to do really boring stuff because I worked in a makerspace, and it was like, review this woodworking manual. And I was like, okay, I will, but, like, I'm not going to be happy about it. And I just recently got switched to, like, sci-fi and graphic novels, which, like, that for me is, like, the peak. That is the epitome of, like, kind of what you want. And the background of having been a sort of author myself, I feel is an advantage when then going to review other people's work, to have the perspective of, I get what you're trying to do, I'm also trying to make stuff, and here's some suggestions I think will help, kind of thing.
Here, for your second edition, maybe.
Although I don't actually give notes very often. It's normally just, like, the library being like, are we gonna buy this or not? Kind of.
Oh, interesting. I never have thought about how a library gets a book.
It's a can of worms. So basically, the recent thing was that Random House just became Penguin House, because they acquired Penguin Publishing. For a very, very long time, there have been, like, 4 big publishing companies in general, and now there's 3.
Simon & Schuster being the other one, or?
Simon & Schuster and HarperCollins, and then, like, for academic stuff, I believe the one that we go to is Macmillan.
Macmillan,
and then for databases, it's EBSCO. And it's really complicated because it's also one of those areas where private sector and public sector intersect, where we have to negotiate these contracts with private sector companies. And, like, that's one of the reasons, like, if you ask any librarian, we are not fans at all of Amazon and Audible. And part of the reason for that is because they will not sell to libraries. So if you're ever asking a library, why don't you have this book? They have it on Amazon. It's because they literally won't sell it to us. And even with other publishers in general, we've been trying to negotiate different, like, forms of contract structures to do it. But, like, basically, for a very long time, it was like, if you wanted to get a ebook, for example, when a library buys it, going into that, the publishing company charges us, like, 7 to 10 times as much as it costs for a single person to buy it themselves. Because they know that it's going to get a lot of use, it's going to get a lot of people, and they're going to lose a lot of sales because people are going to be checking it out from the library instead of buying it themselves. And then the newer thing is, and I think is better in the long run, but, like, I think it's HarperCollins, but don't quote me on that. But they're the ones where now we're kind of looking at our contracts and negotiating it from we're going to lease the book for 2 years, or we're going to lease the book for 22 checkouts. And then once it hits 22 checkouts, then we'll decide whether or not to renew it. Especially for the stuff that comes out and it's new releases, it'll be hot on the shelf and have a bunch of holds and a bunch of checkouts for the first 6 months. And then once the hype has gone down, it kind of just sits on the shelf and starts beginning its process towards weeding. And that's basically, again, I feel like a lot of people who work in collections for libraries are like me, where they're very data driven. There's also so many materials that we have to keep track of that it's just like, I'm generating a report and everything that hasn't circulated in the last 3 years, because we're going by 3 years, because every library I feel like is just going like, 2020 didn't count. Nobody was allowed in libraries for a lot of that time, so that's probably why stuff didn't check out. So we're extending everything by an additional year, but it's like everything that didn't circulate within the last 3 years, we have to review and be like, is this worth holding on to?
So you founded District Comedy in 2020. Mm-hmm. Had you done actually stand-up before then? Because I know you've done acting, you've done improv, silent improv, which we won't talk about. Just because it's
silent,
right?
Yeah,
but we can't talk about it. But like, what kind of? I guess let's just talk through any part that you want that leads you up to then doing district comedy and your experience there.
Sure, yeah. So basically, my first performance experience was technically I was like 7, and I was raised in a Southern Baptist church, and we were doing our own production of the Good News Christmas Cruise, which is a good time celebration at sea. And that was like my first musical, technically. And then it was traumatizing, and then I never performed again until I was like 15. I did some community theater stuff, started doing like stuff at the high school theater department, and basically I started doing, when I was 15, improv with my high school improv club. Basically my family has this idea where like you kind of identify your strengths and your weaknesses, and then you focus the majority of your time trying to improve upon your weaknesses, so that then by the end of it, like, you're an overall well-rounded individual. So I was very shy and very introverted and poor with social skills. Then, like, because of our family theory and stuff, I pushed myself to kind of like do improv after I'd kind of discovered it at my high school. My mom was also a high school teacher at the same high school that I went to, so I was like also roaming the hallways a lot after hours. So I kind of stumbled on this club accidentally, and I was like, oh, okay, I can hang out with these people. But yeah, from there it just kind of like you get the acting bug, I guess, for me the improv bug, and I started doing improv while also doing like high school and college theater. I did the college improv troupe at my local community college, which was funny because I never actually went there, but like as a high schooler, I was like, I'm just too advanced for these other people. I need other people who will challenge my hilarious skills. And that's actually where I met Roz, who is one of my co-hosts. And that is why, like, it is true when I say we have been performing together improv comedy for over a decade now. And then from there, I started with like film acting work when I was 19, so like still mid-college. I was also like getting a degree in theater at the time, as I mentioned. And then in tandem with that, I had done a community play, and then the actors in the community play ended up making this company, which is the one that lasted for 8 years, which was Free Range Improv. That was like the professional improv company, which, like, no shame to the company, but I use the term like professional very loosely just because it's like, don't think that we were doing like gigantic theaters all the time. We would every once in a while for corporate events. One time we performed actually at the Bowie Bay Sox Stadium, which is like crazy to think about, but it was like we were at the stadium technically. It was empty also. So not the glamorous thing you would think it to be, but like for the most part, it is like a very regimented thing because a lot of our venues would be bars, and then a lot of our patrons would be like drunk patrons, and then they would undoubtedly suggest a lot of the same things when we got suggestions from the audience. It's like, we're drunk and sexually repressed, penis, that's your scene suggestion. And so yeah, I did that with Roz and Brooks and Lisa for 8 years. They're my 2 other co-hosts. And then, so that ended in December of 2019, before everything hit with the pandemic. And then, so basically, from now and 5 years prior is when I started working with the theater company in Northern Virginia. which is like the physical theater. They're not the first professional theater that I've worked with, but they're the one that I have the majority of my professional acting experience with because they work under a company membership model. So once I did my first couple shows with them and became an official company member, then it's like they cast from within that pool, and then you do more of their shows and you get to know the people more. And it's really nice. You kind of become a family, and it adds a little bit of stability in otherwise a freelance market of being an actor. So that's the creative side of it. My claim to fame, though, is I did if you check out season 1, episode 3 of Evil Twins on Investigation Discovery crime reenactment dramas, I played both Greg and Jeff as younger folks before they become serial killers, but you can still kind of tell there's like some iffy stuff going on. There's like a good 10 minutes following that story arc, and one of the scenes was so awkward watching because they cut it so that it looks like I'm beating myself up. And it's just like, especially for where I was in my life, which was like still like awkward and coming out in college, I was like, ugh, this is a metaphor. Ugh.
But I mean, that's like the ultimate soap opera dream, is to play a twin. This is like Adam and Stuart on All My Children or whatever. Those were my favorite. That was my favorite. David Canary, he actually passed away quite a while ago, but I remember watching All My Children with my grandma, and it was Adam and Stuart, and then, you know, I guess later on, like Family Matters, you have like, not on a sitcom, you have like Stefan Urkel and Steve Urkel, and so you're like these twins. I mean, I think that's a great, I don't know, that those roles, that's so great just to play twins. I love it.
It's fun. Also, like, it's kind of like, I don't know, again, the theme of today's episode is tangents, but like, that was a really interesting experience for me for the fact that that was also kind of my introduction to, because it was before the theater company, but it was my introduction to acting without words, because it was one of those shows where it's kind of edited so that they have the speakers and the experts and the people who wrote the book on homicidal twins narrating throughout the episode. Like, also, what a career choice. I'm the author on homicidal twins.
Can you imagine, like, Mom, I'm writing a book on what? Homicidal twins. It's like, what? I'm sorry.
You still getting along with your brother?
Found a book for you to review. It's on homicidal twins. I hope that's all right.
Oh my god. Let me give you the inside take. But, like, yeah, basically, so the show gets narrated over by the experts, and then, like, they have, like, a special narrator for, like, doing the transitions and stuff when they're not talking about the book. But, yeah, that was, like, my silent acting, like, premiere, because then you don't want the people who are actually being televised and their bodies visually on display to talk, because then they're SAG eligible and you have to pay them more. Which I ended up being SAG eligible anyway, but I wasn't at this time, which definitely saved the production company a lot of money.
That's interesting, yeah, because that's like Unsolved Mysteries, right? Kind of thing where that show where they would just like talk and then you just see the reenactment. But did that, as far as like just solidifying in you, or did it do anything to affect how you felt about acting, I guess, at that point? Or either way, like,
yeah, it did, but like in a very shallow, superficial way that it affects most people in the entertainment industry. It's like, even though it wasn't challenging to me on an artistic level, it became one of those things where it's like, even though it's nothing of note, even though it's not like I had an especially contributing role in it, it's also like the entertainment industry is in such a state where I think the last study I saw was that it's like 92% of actors are considered unemployed. So getting this show for me, and we did like a cute little, very informal, but still kind of flattering screening between me and my friends when the episode aired. And it's just kind of indicative of that culture, which I actually don't support now, which is you're only valid as an artist or as an actor if there's something that we can see you in on TV. So this was like an ego boost, because it was like something you could see me in on TV, and I would have people Facebook message me every time the episode aired and be like, oh my god, I saw you on TV, and that's cool. But at the same time, it also, not like hurts me at all because, like, people have their own preferences for the type of content that they want to see. But for me, that is not, like, an artistic piece I am especially proud of. It's very easy for me to pretend like I'm hitting my body double and then lay on the floor making a sad face. There's not, like, a ton of emotional depth that goes into those cutscenes. So, yeah, is, like, ego boost, very shallow, though. Very shallow. Versus, like, the stuff I've done with the theater company has been much more artistically rewarding, which you probably wouldn't gather that from my stand-up whenever I talk about them, because I have this bit. We're a physical theater company, so a lot of times there is a scene where you gotta go on stage for 10 minutes while the main actors are doing stuff, and you are a chair that they are sitting on, because we either couldn't afford props or it's artistic choice. Like, we'll let the audience decide that. But the other stuff I've done with them, like our adaptations of Peter Pan, which we also do shows sometimes where we speak. And I feel like get put in those shows more often because I'm not like a trained dancer or anything, and they tend to lean those towards those people. But like for the shows where there's talking, and especially children's shows and comedies, they would put me in. And like we do, and I guess I've talked about them enough. Plug is for Cinetic Theater in Arlington, Virginia, Northern Virginia. But yeah, we're kind of known for doing darker, heavier, more emotionally investigative adaptations of, like, the Grimm's fairy tales. So our Peter Pan was very much like a work where we're diving into really the literal, like, Peter Pan complex of Peter Pan and digging into backstory and making up our own backstory and adding those scenes. Is like, that kind of work is very fulfilling to me. We also did an adaptation of The Trial by Franz Kafka. Oh. And that was great because I actually got to do that show. My fiance is also an actor, so we got to do that together. We did a play on that show where we alluded also to Kafka's Metamorphosis, except everybody else was a bug, and he was the only human, which made sense because basically the entire government is like one unity of insects, and he is the one person who's just trying to get through it normally. He doesn't even know what he's arrested for. This may sound out of context for people listening who haven't read that book, but check out The Trial by Franz Kafka. So that was cute because me and my fiance, to be buddy cockroaches. But yeah, that interesting, more thought-provoking work is what's more rewarding to me now. I think because I'm older and I am at a more, like, mature portion of my artistic development, and also I think partly because with that's probably partly contributed to the fact that I have been able to also, while doing the acting, make a career for myself as a library professional, because having the day job to rely on, one of the huge benefits of that for me was that I started enjoying my art again. Because there was a period in my life where, and again, it was like that shallow point of pride for me, where it's like, I'm gonna make it as a performer. That's gonna be the only way that I make money. And, like, it's a statement of pride. It's basically saying, like, I am not willing to do other work. And at least the way that I had it framed for myself at the time. And then once I kind of, like, humbled myself and gave other areas of interest a try as far as, like, a professional career, and then the stability that comes with that, it gave me so much freedom to be able to, like, pick and choose the gigs that I wanted to do. Like, there were so many jobs that I did even though they, like, killed me inside. Like, I'm gonna spend 17 hours on set as an extra to not even actually go on camera for the paycheck. No, I'm gonna have my day job, I'm gonna get my bills paid, and then with the free time that I have that my job allows me, I can pick and choose meaningful projects because I'm not relying on it. I also felt that, like, even when the gig or the project was something that was artistically fulfilling, a lot of times I wouldn't get to enjoy it because it's like I have to constantly be thinking about where the next job is coming from.
I definitely understand that. And I mean, I got into comedy while I've already been, hopefully halfway through my career. I don't really want to think that I'm not halfway through my career, but it's probably I'm not. And there's a different thing about it being something you can do because you love it, but you don't need it for your paycheck, I guess. There's like a place of, I don't know, privilege or something that has, because then, I can go like buy a drink at a show and it's not that big a deal. And whereas like some people, it's, they're just going and trying to make it just at doing that, which I respect because I didn't have the whatever it takes to do that when I was 20. But I know what you mean. Like, then it's like more comfortable because, and if something doesn't go well, it's not like the end of the world and you're worried that now I'm never going to get paid again for this.
Yeah. And I guess like it really is kind of a place of privilege because like I've heard similar experiences, like Lisa, who is my co-host for Too Funny Feedback, was on the improv troupe with me. She also comes from an acting background, much more professional than me, but a lot of the stories from her earlier days was about how she was busting ass between gigs at like a waitressing job. So it's kind of a place of privilege for me that I have found this other thing that I'm good at and this other skill that, even though like I don't think it's necessarily more important or less important than, say, something more service oriented like waiting tables, it is kind of structured in like the professional I don't know what the word is, but like industry, academia, in such a way that it's like at least it has like consistent hours, and like having a job with consistent hours by itself, let alone like with health benefits or other things that, I may take for granted now. Although I also look at other countries where it's like universal healthcare.
Oh my gosh.
It's like we all could have had that. That's definitely where an element of privilege comes in and kind of advocates more so for like we need universal healthcare, and the amount of stress that would relieve from people who are already struggling so much. I just feel like, thinking of the artists specifically, once that stress was gone for me, it was able to open a lot of creative outlets and creative avenues. And especially with art, it is like a specific conversation because the element of art in any medium has so much to do with play that, like, how are you supposed to do that if you're thinking about, like, your health insurance?
Yeah.
Or, like, where your next paycheck's going to come from, or making rent, and, like, all that other stuff with it.
Yeah. That's very true, too, because there's such a burden on that kind of thing and wondering and not knowing where things are going to come from. So, regarding district comedy, what made you guys start that up?
So, this is really... it's kind of funny. So, yesterday was April Fool's Day, and so I kind of last second was like, we're going to turn our normal Thursday open mic into a Fool's Day festival. And it didn't get a huge ton of traction, but it was really interesting because one of the additional time slots led a comedian to me who in the chat was, again, another shout out, but who was, hey, did you have Erin Tracy as a teacher? And I was like, oh my god, I did. And she's like, I'm taking her stand-up class at the Second City. So basically, I was like really depressed during the pandemic. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to take an online stand-up class at the Second City online. And Erin Tracy was my teacher. And it was something I've wanted to pursue for a while because I have done 2 max in-person, like, open mics. And, like, something went wrong the second time where I just, like, completely bombed, and I was like, well, never again. And then 3 years later, when we're in the pandemic, I was like, I guess I'll give it a try because it's a very independent art form, and I'm stuck by myself in my closet here for a while. So I took this stand-up class, and basically our teacher's assignment was that every week, based on the theme of stand-up that we were studying, we would have to do a set. And she was like, you have to go to a virtual... There's this group called Displaced Comedians, and you have to go to a virtual open mic and get a recording of your set and post it to the page, and then we're going to review it. And me being the psychotic person that I am was like, oh, I don't like not having the element of control that I'm comfortable with. So rather than just going to one of the existing open mics and getting a recording of my set, I'm going to make my own open mic and then record my set from there where I'm also hosting it. And that's basically how District Comedy got started. That was the end of July. I think the 23rd was the first, at least, recorded evidence I have of a TB&J open mic show. And we've been going weekly ever since. And then we've also added on... Because then it was also like... Once I got the first show out and was, like, meeting really interesting people, like Winston Hodges was somebody who was coming to the open mic a lot when it had started, and Desiree Walsh, Nick Dees, a lot of people who kind of discovered it while we were just getting started who are still regulars today. I was like, these people are cool. These people can be my friends. I wonder if I do other shows, I could trick other people into being my friends. So it wasn't ever, like, an idea of, like, we'd get a following or we'd make money from it. But it was like, I'm going to make a different member of my improv troupe a co-host with each show so I can keep in contact with people who I know are funny and who I'm already friends with that I don't want to forget about me because we're all quarantined up. And then I'm also going to kind of create a show where basically people want to be my friend. That's the entire intention behind it, including our newer Sunday show, Jacking Off with Friends, which is where we play Jackbox games. But apparently the title insinuates something different, which I had no idea at the time of writing it, but there we are. No, I also say that tongue-in-cheek. Like, I knew very well what I was doing when I did it.
I'm relieved at that, actually. I was concerned about how long you've been in the pandemic and didn't know
I am a gay man. I realize the insinuation with jacking off with
Well, you
friends.
fooled me. This is your good acting. See, you're a great actor because...
Good voice.
I was like, how did he not know? But then I'm like, well, that's possible. It's always... Everything's possible.
Yeah. I also, I feel like that has definitely inhibited my comedy styling sometimes. Because sometimes, and they say this in comedy classes, comedy acting classes, where it's like you really want to seriously commit to a bit that you're doing. But if you act too seriously, people won't know that you're acting, and then the joke gets lost. Then they just think, oh, he didn't realize it was jacking off with friends. No, I did.
I thought it was funny at first, and I'm like, what?
You can't be too good at acting for comedy.
No,
which is ironic because everybody in acting is like, comedy is so much harder than tragedy.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. One thing I noticed on your website is that two things are mentioned, inclusivity and accessibility. And one thing, I think the inclusivity is a bit more obvious than the accessibility part, just because one thing I've heard a lot now is as we're coming out of the pandemic, how accessible are things going to be to people, because that's been a big change in the pandemic, in comedy and in performance and in shows, people being able to get to shows that couldn't before because of whatever reason, either location or physical limitations or whatever. And so can you talk about why you chose those as two kind of things that were very important for you to cover with your show or your troupe?
Yeah, absolutely. So inclusivity and accessibility were both really important. So again, at the inception of the company, it was more formalized later on, but it originated kind of at the same time where we were all in lockdown, but also all of the Black Lives Matter protests were going on. So it's speaking to that, and it's also speaking to the need that Zoom comedy has kind of been able to fill for a lot of voices, hilarious comedian voices that have been in different ways marginalized or the minority or silenced in some way or another, that because of the online platform being set up the way that it is, have found space. So again, because District Comedy is at least, I'd love one day for us to go into a live venue as well, but for now and for the foreseeable future, we are a virtual comedy club, and part of that is because when we go to a live venue, we want to be able to do it right. We want to be able to do it somewhere where the venue is ADA accessible. We want to be able to do it in a way where we're not dependent on making it a either like pay to play or like a drink minimum, and nothing against the clubs that are trying to do that. I know we all got to do what we got to do to make money, but I feel like this has really made very apparent how many barriers there are for people who are trying to get into stand-up comedy, whether it's because you have a disability and the venue has, like, stairs to the bathroom, which isn't as much a problem in the U.S., but I've heard in other countries that that type of thing is an issue, or whether it's because you are... One thing I've noticed with Zoom rooms is that there are so many more female comedians than I've seen in live rooms, and I feel like a lot of that is because a lot of the clubs in like downtowns, maybe seedier parts of the city, there is a real threat of danger and violence for, you know, people going out late at night to these comedy clubs. I just heard a story the other day about live comedy clubs and it being a normal thing for fights to break out. And I think that there's a lot of factors for doing it online, and I know that it's not the same as live comedy. There's not the direct connection with the audience, which so many people miss from being in lockdown. But it has a lot of benefits as far as being able to do it from your home and not having to commute, being able to save money on gas if you would have to drive a really long way because you live in a more rural area, being able to, we already talked about the other kind of accessibility parts of it, and then the inclusivity kind of speaks to itself in the policy statements that we have with all of our shows, but especially the TB&J open mic, because honestly, the only reason I make such an emphasis on that show is because open mics have such a tendency to attract people who maybe are intentionally looking for the type of mic that my brand is, but also sometimes people just sign up for it without actually, like, reading anything. But to be more clear, that's the show where it's like, before you sign up for the show, you also agree on an electronic form that you acknowledge and consent that anything that the hosts, me and my co-host, consider hate speech is going to get you kicked out of the room, no questions asked. And then we have a 2-strike heckler policy that gets you kicked out of the room, and we have a zero-tolerance harassment policy where it's like, if you just say that somebody was harassing you, we are not playing the game where it's like, oh, are they telling the truth? Are we going to investigate this? No, you're the victim in this scenario. We're going to take your word for it, and if you tell us that someone's harassing you, we're kicking them out. No questions asked. And it feels like every time I do it, it's like a big deal and a bit of a buzzkill, and that's also why it's the structure of the show is like intro, harassment policies. Tom does his set first because he's not going to make any comedian have to open for the show right after having to follow harassment policies. But that's the inclusivity part of it, is we want to be a space, because we're in an online forum and we have that type of control, where we are giving diverse and less heard voices a space. And for that to happen, the space has to be safe. And it's gotten me in some really, like, icky situations as far as having to kick people out of the room, even though they'd been, like, coming to the mic for a long time and been really loyal, or having to kick people out of the room and then messaging me afterwards and being like, hey, I thought that this joke was okay. A lot of my friends are gay, kind of thing. And that is something that, again, is an important part of the mission and something that I am very committed to. It's not always easy, but something that I am happy to take on for the sake of keeping it as inclusive as it has been, because that's something that I'm very proud of and something that I'm very protective of.
You should be, because I will say that probably someone listening will be like, what does it mean, like, harassment? Well, I can say for sure that it means in a Zoom room getting private messaged by someone and being uncomfortable about it, for example. I mean, that's one form of it, right?
Exactly.
Because I've had that happen where I had to just give the guy the benefit of the doubt, but he just wouldn't stop talking to me, and I finally said, hey, I'm gonna watch the show, hope you have a good night, thanks for the support, because he just kept going like, you were really funny, I really think you're great. Oh, I like your pictures on Facebook. And I told my friend who was in the room too, I
through
said,
my Facebook and like looking through my
yeah, like,
photos.
why are you on my Facebook during a show? Like, what are you doing? Yeah, it's weird. And then finally and then he's like, oh, you should come to my writing group. And I'm like, no. And it could have all been totally fine, but it's just like, I had to finally just say, hey, I'm trying to watch the show. Have a good night. And then he stopped. And if he wouldn't have stopped, I probably wouldn't have said anything. But it's just that kind of stuff where, would that happen to someone else? Are you messaging all the dudes also on the show and saying that you like their photos and that you like want them
like,
in your writing
probably
group?
not.
No.
And that's like part of it is that like, because I've also, again, a librarian, very thorough. I have sent out like feedback forms for people to be like, what are some things about the mic that we would change? The majority of people, I think it came out to 70% were like, we love that you like do the reminder about what your policies are at the top of the mic. And like some people are like, do you really have to do that? Won't people just be funny? It's like, for the exact reason that you describe, anybody who may not have been to the mic before, I want to make sure is aware that they don't have to be in the sort of situation where you were put in, where it's like you felt maybe that like you had to kind of talk to this guy and be polite about it, even though he was like stalking your Facebook profile, basically. I want people to feel comfortable that you don't have to be the bad guy, you don't have to create drama. Send me a private message and we'll kick them out, no questions asked. It's just because that's also something that I feel like we do is like we will almost twist the narrative sometimes and put the onus on the victim where it's like, oh, why didn't you just say this to them? And then they probably would have left you alone. Or why didn't you just do this or that? And it's like, a lot of times, and again, more so at live venues, it's like talking back and completely shutting a guy down and there are many, many reports of this that you can cite. I ain't gonna do anybody's research for you. Not you specifically, but I imagine I'm also like always paranoid that there's gonna be a bunch of haters in the comments for some reason. I'm sure everybody's enjoying this. But there are so many examples that you can see of documented times where women specifically have been approached by men, have tried to politely say no, and ended up dead.
Yeah. It's true.
And again, the stakes aren't that high because it's virtual, which again is a benefit. But nonetheless, it's going to definitely be enough to keep somebody from coming back. And I've heard stories from various improv clubs that I've been a part of live before the pandemic, where it was like a similar situation, and then it kept somebody who was extremely funny from continuing to pursue improv or comedy. And I feel like that is such a waste, because the majority of my favorite comedians are all women. And to think that there are other voices that are trying to come out and trying to, like, dabble in comedy, and then they gotta have to navigate through all of that just to kind of experiment with a new art form to them. It's like, it's heavy, and we don't need it.
No, that takes the comedy out of it. It's great that you guys have those policies, and I think it's great that you started that. And then I guess the last thing for me is just, I want to plug your podcast, Into the Void, because I was
laughing into the
void. Yeah, mine's no, I just wanted to promote it Into the Void, because no one might be
oh, okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
Maybe no one's going to hear this. No, you're right. It's called Laughing Into the Void, and I
we're
think
plugging it into the void.
Yeah, just in case no one hears it.
Laughing into the void squared. There we go.
Yeah, but I think it's cool. And did you guys just decide to do that just kind of out of, just kind of what a lot of us did, which was just keep making like everyone's making a podcast? Or
So that was 100%, and I feel like we may have talked about this a little bit when you were on that show, but like, kind of, I feel like that episode that you were on gave you a little bit of insight, and I feel like we're kind of common in this way. I think we have like similar managerial brains. So the reason Laughing Into the Void came about was because, again, it was a tactic to make friends and stay in contact with friends that I already had. It wasn't just this, but like thinking about, say, my old improv troupe and using that as a potential pool of candidates to do stuff. And like thinking about who would be most likely with their availability, with their ability to handle the technology element, and who I think would just be a good fit for the type of content that I intended for district comedy to come out with, which is, again, very inclusive, like, we're all just gonna have a good time, but I also don't mind if you say penis, sort of thing. Like, that's where it starts, and then I think about, like, okay, who are those people? What are their strengths? And then Roz specifically had tried to, with the improv troupe before, do a podcast, and not for any one specific person's fault, but it was just much harder to coordinate then. We didn't have all the tools and resources that we have now. So knowing that, like, she hosts her own weekly, like, live stream show, knowing that she has interest in podcasts, knowing that she's interested in comedy, and knowing that she would be a good balance for my type of personality were all things where I was like, we would do well with an interview show together. Because I think I'm a Virgo. I am a Virgo through and through. I'm very organized, I like to think, and I won't say I like to think. I'm trying to, like, take more space for myself. But I was recently called the most organized person in comedy. And that's not an official title, but I'm, like, trying to own that brand. So we're going to go with that. But, like, so for that type of personality, you need someone to balance that out and remind you during the interview, okay, it's great that you have your structured, thought-provoking questions, but then we need an element to kind of bring it back down to earth and kind of keep it in a lighter atmosphere and funny. Even though it's not a funny podcast, we touch on some pretty heavy subjects, but it's all comedy related, and it's not as much fun for the comedian if it's, like, just heavy stuff the entire time.
Yeah, or just if there's no room for improv, ironically, right?
For it to be, like, conversational.
Yeah, here it's just like, oh, I have these, like, 10, 20 questions, and you got to go through them. And if you say something interesting, I am not going to ask you about it. I'm just going to plow ahead, right?
Which is exactly how I do my comedy. The way that I do my comedy is I have prepared a script, and it sounds conversational because of the acting background, but it's not. I have memorized it verbatim, down to the word, down to the article, and there is oftentimes what comes up during my act is... And I feel like it reads across my face, and it shouldn't. That's where my acting prowess fails me. But, like, I have scheduled and written exactly 15 minutes of material, and your laugh is interrupting my set, and we have an agenda, and we have jokes to get through. Unfortunately, that is how I approach it, and I'm trying to get away from that. I hate crowd work, but I'm pushing myself, like I said, to focus on my weaknesses for that kind of issue to be resolved. But yeah, if it weren't for Roz, it would be a very different show, and I think it is much better for her being on it. And she was the inspiration behind it.
Oh, nice. All right, cool. So I have a set of questions I ask every guest, but before I do that, I'm going to ask... Yeah. The fun 5. But before that, I'm going to ask, do you have any advice or mantra that you just generally like to share, or that comes up for you that you want to share with the More Than Work audience?
Yeah, it's going to be my book. It's coming out late fall. No, I just feel like there are so many good pieces of advice. But off the top of my head, one that has really resonated with me is just to be kinder to yourself. Artists really have a tendency, more than most people, to put a lot of pressure on themselves to be exceptional at their craft, which, because of the type of market we're in, is constituted. It is very competitive, and unfortunately, like, jobs for artists are a very finite resource. But that being said, you gain nothing from being hard on yourself when evaluating your craft. Gently reflecting is going to be 10 times more beneficial if the alternative is going to be so harsh that you don't go back to the craft. Whatever sort of reflection you can do while also, like, clocking your hours, and at least for me, this is how I have to write. I have to, like, set a time every day and, like, write for a certain amount of time and work through it like a mule. And if you're that kind of person, like, being gentle with yourself about it, if you, like, miss a day, it doesn't mean that now you're, like, super far behind, or, like, you're screwed for life. Like, it's fine. You're still funny. You were probably going to be funny if you don't write at a consistent time every day. Just, like, being super critical, oh god, sometimes it can be helpful, but it can be such a creativity stifler if it's not, like, gentle. So be gentle to yourselves. Be gentle! That's my advice. Be gentle!
It sounds
so yell it at you.
All right, cool. No, that is true. So, my fun 5. So, what is the oldest t-shirt that you have and still wear?
Oh, this is a loaded question because I gained weight in quarantine, so a lot of them. I wear a lot of my boyfriend's clothes now. I don't know how many of my own I have left. So it's like this counts. It's like a 3/4 sleeve t-shirt, but it's like a baseball t-shirt, but it has the Free Range Improv logo on it, and I think it was like our 2nd or 3rd year. We do like these awesome anniversary parties, and that's what it's from. We had shirts and we saw a game.
Ah, cool. All right. And if every day was really Groundhog's Day, like a lot of people are saying because of the pandemic and we're just kind of stuck in our houses a lot of the time, what song would you have your alarm set to play every morning?
Oof. 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 Huh. I mean, okay, I'll give you 2 answers. Right now, it would probably be that song from The Greatest Showman, Never Enough. Just because that's been on my TikTok feed and it's in my head all the time, and I fucking love it. But also, like, all-time, like, always on repeat in my head would probably be Digital Witnesses by St. Vincent.
Okay, cool. All right, well, those will end up on the playlist, the Spotify playlist.
That's fun.
Yeah.
That's gonna be very, like, different genres.
It's got a bunch of... It's different. That's a different playlist for sure at this point. Coffee or tea or neither?
Coffee.
That was an easy answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have really high blood pressure. My doctor's concerned.
Yeah, I was told to cut down on coffee, and I was like, all right, sure. You know?
As soon as the world cuts down on being fucking a bitch.
Exactly. And so, can you think of, like, the last time you laughed so hard you cried or just couldn't stop, or maybe something that just kind of gets you to do that?
So, yesterday, during the earlier part of the festival, Katie Zane did a set, and it killed me. It killed me. I was laughing, I was crying. It was just like, they have such a unique perspective, and like, I just love their sense of humor. Like, it got me. It killed me. I wish I could think of, like, the specific joke that, like, killed me about it. But in general, also, like, my genre of humor that will get me cracking up and laughing every single time consistently is, like, anything that's going to be, like, really absurdist, maybe, like, in the sci-fi realm of, why did the chicken cross the road? Because it was the only road she'd ever known, kind of thing. Like, that is my shit.
Nice. Well, that's cool. And that's good for a shout-out to another comedian. And the last one, who inspires you right now?
Tiffany Haddish. Partly because I know she's on this app. Are you listening right now?
I know, that'd be cool.
You're my inspiration. No, I feel like I'm very, like... It's weird, because I haven't been thinking about my comedy that much, because I've been, like, thinking of myself as a producer. But when I think of who inspires me, probably my fiancé. I think that he's awesome, and he also has a better sense of humor than I do. I bounce a lot of my jokes off of him before they, like, make it into my set, and then just, like, for general life things, he's an inspiration. He's an incredible human being. I'm so lucky. Awesome,
and congrats on the engagement in 2020, by the way. That's great.
Thanks! It was a crazy year, and I have a bit about this, but I feel bad. It was such a good year for me. And it was such a bad year for other people, but that was the best thing out of that year. Oh god, I get to spend the rest of my life with this guy. Oh,
that's good. So this episode, just, you know, we're recording it April 2nd, so you already referred to your April 1st show. It'll probably come out in a couple weeks, but if people want to know more about you or find you, where should they go, and what do you want them to look for?
Visit district-comedy.com, because we have a bunch of different platforms. We got the Facebook page, we have the Instagram, we have the whatever, but the home base where you can find all the other stuff is district-comedy.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Tom. It was a lot of fun chatting with you. I really appreciate you doing the show.
I really appreciate you asking me. I'm so glad that we were able to connect.
Yeah, cool.
Yay!
Thanks again for listening this week. You can find out more about the guest in the show notes and at RabiaSaid.com. Joe Maffia created the music just for this podcast. Find him on Spotify. That's Joe, Maffia. And Rob Metke is responsible for our visual design. You can find him online by searching for Rob, Metke. Thanks, Rob. Let me know who you'd like to hear from or about your own experiences defining yourself outside of work. Follow at More Than Work Pod or send a message on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Or visit our website, morethanworkpod.com. Give us a follow on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a review if you like. Thanks for listening to More Than Work. While being kind to others, don't forget to be kind to yourself.